Okay, good afternoon. So welcome. This is a tutorial on FHIR Shorthand. And my name is Mark Kramer. Also standing by is Chris Moselle. Mark and Chris are the authors of FHIR Shorthand. We've had a lot of help along the way. We both work for MITRE. MITRE is a company in the US that works primarily with the federal government. We are a nonprofit. We work in the public interest, doing research and development in many fields, including health. And we are the folks behind some of the tools that you see here: Inferno, MCode, Cynthia, clinical quality language, and now FHIR Shorthand. So I just want to ask, is there some echo on the line? We're good? Okay.
Mark, if you're hearing an echo, you might have a Whova tab open that you should close.
Okay. All right, so let's get to it. So I just want to review that there's quite a few opportunities to learn about FHIR Shorthand. And excuse me, I'm still getting an echo. I'm going to close this up. All right, that's much better. Sorry for the distraction. So yeah, we're halfway through Tuesday. I hope you were able to see the presentation on profiling with Forge. Now we're going to learn a different technique, FHIR Shorthand. Immediately after this session, there'll be a Let's Build session, which we'll go through in more detail, a demonstration of how to build a implementation guide, and also how to translate an existing implementation guide into FHIR Shorthand. Then tomorrow there's presentations on the IG publisher, and on Thursday, Chris will lead a presentation on some advanced FHIR Shorthand and new tools that we have, some of which we'll hint at here. So I just want to give a little bit of background before we begin. FHIR Shorthand, by the way, is abbreviated FSH, and it's been referred to affectionately as fish. So if I talk about fish, or see fish puns, you'll know where that comes from. So very quickly, because I'm sure most of you are aware that base FHIR doesn't provide the specifics for application areas, for many application areas. So profiling is the way that FHIR provides for additional details, and a profile can take a base resource and adds value sets, fixed codes, extensions, and various restrictions on the base resources. So when you have a use case, generally you put together a set of profiles which describe the use case, including things like operations and search parameters, and together they implement that use case, which are then collected together into an implementation guide. And it's the IGs that are really used to create the APIs that implementers implement. So that's really guidance to implementers. It's extremely important, because without an implementation guide, you really wouldn't be able to do much beyond the very basics with FHIR. So it's been a developing story on how you actually create implementation guides and profiles. And initially, there were two techniques. You could always hand edit things like structure definitions and value sets in XML or JSON in order to create the profiles that you needed. There was also a technique of editing spreadsheets. Some are still, on that methodology. It's being phased out, however. These spreadsheets, there'd be a lot of Excel spreadsheets to manage. It wasn't a very friendly way to manage a large project, because it's difficult to diff a spreadsheet against a previous version of a spreadsheet. So and you have to have many files open. It's very hard to manage. So a few years after that, companies like Lantana and Firely began to introduce some tools. You've heard about Forge since you're here, most likely. These are graphical user interfaces over the base definitions. So no longer do you have to face XML or JSON. You can go through nice friendly dialogues which help guide you through that process. Now, early on at MITRE, we were interested in also, simplifying this process of profiling. And sorry, I've skipped ahead unintentionally. Just wanted to put this window down. Okay. So we were more interested in a language. We had just worked on clinical quality language, and I really just wanted to be able to make certain declarative statements that would be executed by an interpreter to create the profiles. So I consider this kind of a command-driven type of approach where you say what you want in a short declarative statement, and then there's a tool that turns that into the necessary artifact that can be consumed by, for example, the FHIR IG publisher. So that's the approach we're going to be looking at. And, there's some discussion about which one is better. I don't want to get into such discussions. It's definitely that some people prefer one, some people will prefer the other. And fortunately, you can go back and forth now without much resistance and use whichever tool you'd like. So I do think that there's some unique advantages to FHIR profiling using FHIR Shorthand. The statements that you generate, they're pretty readable and understandable. I like to be able, I really like making changes in text because you can use copy, paste, search, and replace, make global changes. For example, if you want to rename something across the board, or you've made some sort of design change, it's very easy in text using a development environment to just copy, paste, do global replaces. It's very agile. The other thing you can do with text is put it under source code control, and that allows you to do distributed development. It's easy to branch and merge, do differentials between past versions to see what has changed. The other thing that Shorthand gives you is error checking. So it's very easy to make mistakes when you're editing XML or JSON. A lot of those mistakes, not all of them, but a lot of them can be caught before you get too far down the line simply by running a compiler, which tells you in more or less same way in any language that you're making a mistake. Error messages come. And FHIR Shorthand can do everything you can do in manual editing. You can make profiles, extensions, value sets, etc. And now we just released the ability to make custom resources and logical models. So that sort of rounds out, I think, the set of artifacts that you generally need. Also, Shorthand is a balloted standard. It's now at STU 1. In the fall, we're going to have another ballot for STU 2 and maybe normative. It's integrated with the FHIR IG publisher, so you can make use of standard tools, and those standard tools know about FHIR Shorthand. It's free and it's open source, and your contributions are welcome. We've just had a major contribution from Athena Health. In fact, Athena Health contributed the labor to put logical models in FHIR Shorthand, which is great, and it runs on both Windows and Mac transparently. Apparently, this technique has been very popular. So we've had about 40,000 downloads of our package. Not all of these are unique. Every time we have a new version, you have to download that. So the FHIR community, I don't even think is that large, but still it's been popular, and you can see that from the number of downloads. It's still running around 700 a week or something like that. Also, we keep track of projects that are using FHIR Shorthand in the so-called fish finder. I'll show you where that is. And there's over 100 IGs right now that are using FHIR Shorthand as their primary technique of expressing their IGs. So it's pretty much got pretty wide use, which is nice. So let's take a look at what makes FHIR Shorthand. And I'm going to do this by example. I'm not going to get into any hard syntax. I'm just going to show you what it looks like and rely on you to sort of intuitively understand the language, and then I'll refer you to some sources where you can learn more. So the first thing I'd like you to do is actually go to a website, fishschool.org. So if you are in a browser now, you can just open up a browser and you'll see something like this. Actually, I'm in Fish Online. So fishschool.org is a site where you can find all things FHIR Shorthand related, and you can find documentation. This is very, very useful. We will be able to, what we'll be working with now is a tool called Fish Online, and I'll introduce some examples through Fish Online. So the first thing that I'll have you do is type I gotta get this out of the way to go full screen again. Go to this short URL. So I'll give you a moment to do that. This URL will take, we can actually store examples in URLs. This will resolve out to that Fish Online that I just showed you. And so if I do that in the background, bring up my browser, and I've got this bookmarked, so I don't have to retype it in, but here's what you should be seeing alongside. And it's got some samples of FHIR Shorthand. So let me walk you through some of that. I'll return to full screen and trust that you're looking at that in the background as well. All the examples have to be COVID this year, so I'm going to do a really silly COVID example. It's a serious topic, but this is a very, very short and not realistic example just to introduce you to some concept. So let's make a profile which constrains how you report a COVID-19 diagnosis. So we're going to base that on condition. We're going to use a ICD-10 code U07.1. We're going to bind the severity to a value set. We'll give it a name, COVID Severity Value Set. And then we'll require a patient as a subject. So those four things. So we'll start out by saying profile : COVID diagnosis. That's the name we chose. Its parent is condition. The description, very short, is how to report a COVID diagnosis. So the first thing that we want to do inside this profile is bind the code in the condition to this ICD-10 code, U07.1. And we're going to use what's called an alias. The alias is bound down here. So $ICD just has this expansion into a much longer URL, which is the standard URL for ICD-10. So instead, we could just type that up here, but it gets kind of messy and long. So we're going to define this alias to make it a little bit shorter. The other thing you'll notice is this use of the pound sign. So a code in FHIR Shorthand is defined by a code system, the pound sign, and a code. The code itself is this U07 code. And the equal sign just means assignment. So we're just assigning this code. The severity now, we want a custom value set for the severity. We'll say that this severity code has to come from a value set we're calling COVID Severity VS, and we're going to make that required. So we haven't yet defined this COVID Severity Value Set, but we'll do that in a moment. So again, we want the subject to be only a reference to patient. So we use the keyword only, and that requires, that restricts the subject, which could be a group or a location, down to just a patient. So that's what this statement does when we're restricting things to a certain value type. We use the keyword only. And finally, we want the subject to be cardinality minimum 1, maximum 1. And if you've looked at an IG, you'll know that this is how FHIR likes to express the cardinality. So there's 4 statements there which achieves these 4 things. It creates the profile. So now let's get back to this severity value set. So in the previous slide, we decided we would have something called COVID Severity Value Set. And if you look at condition severity in FHIR, it's a preferred value set, but it's not required. And it has 3 values. So let's just pretend we want these 3 values that are in that value set, but we're going to add something called a SNOMED code for life-threatening. So the FHIR shorthand for this is you start out with a keyword value set and just name the previously cited value set name and describe it with some text. Then we'll say include codes from the value set, and then we give the full URL of this condition severity value set. And if I click on that, in fact, you can see the tooltip there. That's the same well, actually it's not. But if you went there, you'd see that the canonical URL is this URL. Then we'll have a second line that says include this SNOMED SCT, again, as an alias. And you'll see the # for the code, life-threatening severity. So we've taken these 3 codes from the FHIR value set and added this 4th code. So these 2 statements together define our value set. So now we have a profile, and now we have a value set. Now, you may want to also have an example of the profile. So let's add that. So in this case, we'll use the keyword instance. So we're creating an instance, which we're just going to call diagnosis example, which is an instance of a COVID diagnosis. And the description is just simple example. So in order to have this example, we'll need a sample patient, Jane Doe. And we'll set the subject, which is required, as a reference to Jane Doe. And Jane Doe is going to be defined, it's defined down here. It's an instance of patient. It has a name, a family name, and a given name using these assignment statements. So name.family is Doe and name.given is Jane. And we're going to give it a code because we've diagnosed Jane Doe with COVID. So that's the ICD-10 code. And then the severity, and I think I failed to update this. Actually, that's not consistent with the previous slide. I apologize for that. And the severity with the alias SCT and the severe, we'll declare that she has severe COVID. So again, it's just really 3 simple statements, all assignment statements that get us to this example. So now let's go back to Fish Online again. And what we're going to do is just click on this convert to JSON with all this text already assumed to have been typed in. So let's do that and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to bring this to the foreground and make it a little larger so you can see that more clearly. So you can see we have the profile, the aliases, and so forth, and we'll just convert that to JSON. So it does a little thinking, especially the first time you do this. It's downloading a piece of code which runs in your browser. And you'll see on the right-hand side now some JSON. And you can see that this is the structure definition for the COVID diagnosis. And there's a bunch of things in here that in fact we didn't add, which are inherited from the base resource. You can see some mappings. You can also see that the version has been set by default to version 1. The status has been set to active by default. So there's a few extra things in here. But you also see that the JSON equivalent of setting this code, fixing this code as a pattern. You can see that the reference to the patient is set. So we've created a structure definition for the COVID diagnosis. If you click on the far right, you can also see the value set that we created. And that one's quite simple. It just has an include statement inside the compose, which is our value, the pre-existing value set, and secondarily that code that we added. Third, we have the diagnosis example. And the example here is for Jane Doe. It has the code and it has the severity. And finally, we have the patient, Jane Doe herself, which has the family name and the given name. And, you know, the FHIR has really done some work here for you by knowing that the given name is an array. So the way that, you know, the given name is formatted is a little bit different than the way that the family name is formatted. So some work has been done in preparing these definitions. So all these definitions are defined by these, you know, 24 lines or 23 lines of FHIR Shorthand. So that's all pretty cool, and you can interact with FHIR Online. You can do it now with your favorite piece of fragment of FHIR. You can use the URL that was on the previous couple of slides ago to reproduce this example. But let's just review what we've learned so far. So keywords. If you're making a profile, you have to specify a parent. If you're making an instance, you have to say what it's an instance of. And it can be the instance of, it can be a profile, or it can be a resource. And then the keyword value set if you're making a value set. For codes, you have a code system followed by a hash sign, then the code itself, and optionally a display text. We've seen aliases. Aliases are defined by a short equality statement that gives the name of the alias followed by a URL. We've seen several different assignment rules. You notice that rules always start with a asterisk, as if they're sort of a bullet list. So this assignment rule always has, or these assignment rules always have equal signs. Binding rules, which bind a codable concept usually to a value set, uses the word from. Cardinality rules have this familiar min ... max kind of format, and then data type rules, which restrict data types, use the keyword only. So that's some really basic FHIR. The other thing I think that we've learned is that each item in FHIR has a declaration followed by keywords followed by a set of rules. So we've done a couple of declarations which use profile and value set and instance, but there are more. You can do code systems and extensions. We'll get to extensions if we have time. And then each one of these declarations are followed by a certain set of keywords. I haven't used them all, but you can do descriptions, titles, IDs, and so forth. So then there's about 10 types of rules. I've highlighted in red some of the new rules that we've added in version 2. So the keywords resource and logical are new in version 2, as are the rules, path rules, and add element rules. So you can find out more about this by, well, I'll give you the reference at the end of the talk. So we can go a little bit further. Some common thing that you do in profile is add an extension. So I scratched my head and wondered what I could add to that COVID condition. I came up with certainty of diagnosis as a possibility. So again, it's not realistic necessarily, but we're going to add this extension representing this certainty of diagnosis. We're going to name that, give it a local name, certainty. We'll set the cardinality to 0 or 0 to 1 and make it a must support. So that's something new that you haven't seen. So I'm throwing a couple more new things here. So the syntax for that is extension contains, another reserved word. And then we'll give the name of an extension which is yet to be written, condition certainty. We'll give it the local name certainty, the cardinality 0, 1, and then an MS for must support. So this has a little bit more meat to it, a little bit more complicated syntax, but we're really saying this extension array contains this element. And we'll define this in the next slide, but locally we're going to call it certainty. So how do you define an extension? Again, it's a declaration followed by a keyword, followed by some rules. So here the extension is called condition certainty, and we're going to constrain its value to a codable concept and then bind that codable concept to yet another value set. So the way to do that, if you know extensions, they have a value X. So we're going to say that this value X is only a codable concept that restricts the data type. And then we're going to bind it to a value set. We're going to say value X from condition certainty value set. We're going to do the same sort of thing with the value set that we did before, except here we're going to give it 3 explicit codes, all from SNOMED using the alias that we defined before. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the value set. We can go back to our editor if you want. We can take a look at the Fish Online now. And I've actually done the Julia Child cooking show, and I've added this extension. So we can then load this up. You can see the extension is now defined. And if we want to convert to JSON, we just click on that convert to JSON button. And lo and behold, we should have an extension. Well, it's a demo, and in demos, things don't always work. So we should have an extension. If I'm not seeing it, I think we have to refresh it. I'm not sure why.
Mark, I believe it's there on the right-hand side, condition certainty, the first one under structure definition.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's also a set of nervousness. I was looking for extensions over here, so thank you. Okay, so here's our definition of the extension. It was there all along, and it worked perfectly. It was human error. Okay, so now we've defined an extension. There's some other things you can do, which I will delve briefly into. So one thing you want to do with extensions typically is to limit them to the type of resource that they can be applied to. And with condition certainty in its name, it says it should be applied to condition. So the way to limit this is actually through a couple of not obvious rules. And I'm just going to put them here and let you look at them and be kind of puzzled. And that's okay. You don't have to know the syntax for this right now. But since these rules are a little bit complicated, I'm actually going to invoke something different. I'm going to capture these rules in a rule set. And this rule set is something that you can apply. If you copy these rules, you can apply this to any extension and apply them through what we call an insert rule. So what's happening here is that we're taking some rules which we really don't want to type over and over, putting them in a set of rules, and then invoking those rules in the definition. So you can see the extension content, and we're inserting these rules. And what this does when we do the insert, it literally unpacks these 2 rules just where you see the insert. So it's kind of like a macro. I like to think about it as a macro. It just records these two rules, and then when it hits this point, it will unpack them and play those rules. You might wonder, all right, well, Mark, where are these rules and how do I use them? So let's go back to FHIR Online. And there's a button here which I haven't explored yet, which is in the upper left, FHIR Examples. So in the FHIR Examples, there's actually, thank you, I have another talk coming up. If you look at rule sets, there's some interesting things here. There's set extension context. So if you click on this, you'll see a full example of how you can set the context of an extension. And you can take these rules and you can say, all right, well, I like that. I can see how they're applied here in a different context. I'm going to copy those over and I'm going to put it over here into my text. And now I'm going to use that. I'm going to, where I have my extension, I'm going to insert that rule. I'm going to say, just like that. So now I'm using some fish that someone else wrote, which is pretty useful. And that's been added to the condition certainty. You can see that somewhere down here, context. So, you know, there's some useful things that we've added in rule sets. For example, one of the things that I always need to do is create components in an observation. And so here's a rule set. Now I never have to worry about that. It's really just, I just type create component with these 5 arguments and kaboom, I've got all the code that I need to create a component. Here's an example of a profile for tumor size. And I wanted two components, one for the maximum dimension, one for the other dimensions. There can be up to 2 other dimensions. And if I want to see how that works, I can just copy it to the keyboard and I can clear out my paste it in there and just see how that works. And I can create the profiles that come with this tumor size profile. So here in tumor size, you'll notice the only thing it's producing is this tumor size profile, but it's got some components. And here are the components that it produced. So now we've got the situation where the whole community can begin to share components. And I'd invite you to contribute your FHIR examples, your favorite examples of rules to this GitHub repo. You can clone the repo, create your examples, and then do a pull request. And we'll be curating those examples so you can you know, come up with something cool, and it can be here in FHIR Online for other people to use. So that's a new feature. I like it. I like it a lot. So the other way, I'm going to now show you briefly another way to learn FHIR Online or FHIR Shorthand using FHIR Online, which is going the other way, which is converting an existing profile to FHIR Shorthand. So this convert to FHIR exercises something called GoFHIR, which converts FHIR JSON to FHIR Shorthand. So let's give that a try. And I was searching for a profile to use. I just used something that was built into FHIR. They've got some profiles in release 4, and there's a body height profile. So I'm just gonna grab that. Just gonna grab that profile, and again, I've got it bookmarked, which here's the body height profile. So here's a long structure definition, and what's interesting about this, this actually has 3,000 lines of structure definition, so it's pretty long. And if I go back to Fish Online, what I'm going to do is paste that into the right-hand side. Okay, so you can see 3,700 lines of structure definition, all to define body height, and click Convert to Fish. And out on the right-hand side, when it's finished, is a profile which has 57 lines. So that's a lot shorter. It sort of proves, you know, the shorthand, that it is indeed shorthand. And you'll see some rules. So how does this help you learn FHIR Shorthand? Well, you can go to the actual FHIR profile in the specification, and compare what you see here with the profile in FHIR Shorthand with what you see on the page in the FHIR specification. So I'll just point out a couple of things that are actually different here from that you may not have seen before. Sorry, I want to resume my slideshow, and here we go. Here we go. So here's some of the rules. This is where we are, and you can try this too. You'll see some rules that have this caret symbol, this up arrow, and what this does is it sets certain metadata in the structure definition. So you'll see things like, is this an experimental profile? What's the date of publication? Who's the publisher? And these things are really referring, this up arrow, I think about it like, okay, set this up in the metadata in the structure definition. It doesn't appear in the actual body height profile per se, but it's in the structure definition. So whenever you see that caret in FHIR Shorthand, it's sort of bumping up to the next level. The other thing you see are array indices, 0, plus, and equals. And you'll see this here with extensions. So this is kind of curious. What does that mean? It means that you're setting a series of extensions, and the plus sign refers to moving up to the next indice, and the equal sign means stay at the same indice. So basically you're starting at 0, and you're setting the URL of this extension, which is actually an extension up in the structure definition, and then setting another property of the same extension, and then going to the next extension, setting its URL and its value, and the next extension, its URL and value, and the next extension. So really, there's 4 extensions here in the structure definition itself. So that's a little bit complicated, but there's some ins and outs, and this is one of the ways that you can accomplish some very powerful things with Fish Online, with FHIR Shorthand. So I'll just refer you to the full specification is an implementation guide itself. You can find this at build.phir.org/IG HL7 FHIR Shorthand. But of course, the easiest way to find it is just Google. Just Google FHIR Shorthand, and it'll take you to this specification. And that language specification is the complete description of everything you can do in the language. There's also, when you get to that IG, if you click on downloads, you'll see a quick reference card. And I always thank the folks at FHIRly for giving me the inspiration for this. They have a quick reference card for FHIR. Here we've tried to capture all the syntax of FHIR Shorthand in 2 pages. So this is quite helpful. You can print it out, keep it at your, at your desk, and look at it when you need to. And also there's a growing set of resources and tools, and I'll just give some advertisement for Chris Moselle's talk on Thursday afternoon where he's going to go through some of these tools that we haven't had time to go through or we've just brushed by. I'm actually going to do also directly after this, I'm going to show you how to use Sushi and Go Fish from the command line, which we haven't done yet, to produce an IG. And actually the exercise, the other exercise we're going to do, we're going to take US core, which is written in JSON and XML, and we're going to translate that using Go Fish tool into FHIR Shorthand. So that should be pretty interesting and exciting. And we'll then regenerate the US core IG totally from FHIR Shorthand. Should be exciting. Hope it works. So I'm going to stop there. I'll leave this up. These are slides which, if you've got 15 minutes now during the break before 4:15, we want you to get ready for that Let's Build session by doing some installs. I'll just leave this up so you can read it during the question and answers, and we have 5 minutes remaining for that. So I'm open to any questions. So Miriam, or Chris, have any questions come in?
Yes, we have 3 questions in the Q&A. So let's start with one here is it possible to dump from existing IG XML to FHIR code? I think you kind of answered that, but it mentions XML, so you might want to comment on that.
So we can. So Go Fish works with both XML and JSON. So if your sources are in XML, we can still translate it to Fish.
Okay, good, thank you. And then we have another question there as well about is there a way to generate human readable HTML specs like the US core patient page that we have in the US core implementation guide? Is that possible as well with FHIR?
So I guess I need a little bit of clarification on that. So the human readable
yeah, so the actual HTML page with of course extra.
So the HTML page is comprised in a number of different parts. There's markdown that or there's an HTML include that you can do that just puts like handwritten text in it. The IG publisher will generate a text description of the profile. That's another piece of it. So you can contribute, basically you have to write the human readable. If you want to explain anything, you're going to end up writing that explanation. But I'll show you in the next session how to create the pages that go in the IG. But basically you just create some markdown or some HTML and include it in the right place in your project, and it'll funnel it into the project, into the page. And the other thing is that the IG publisher has a way to take the structured data, which you see in FHIR or even in the JSON, and just produce some sort of rendering of that on the page. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, well, thank you. Another question here by Diana. Is version 2 already released, and can you talk more about the logical model capabilities?
So I'd love to, but I don't quite have time. So version 2 is released, yes. And right now we have a 2.0 beta. And as I mentioned briefly on Thursday, there is a session on advanced FHIR Shorthand. So Chris will be covering the logical models right here on Thursday at 3:15 Eastern Time. So please join us if you can. If you can't, then the documentation has been brought up to date with logical models. So I mentioned that the formal documentation, we've got documentation of how to use logical models already up on build.phir.org.
Okay, thank you. There's another question in last question here from Lauren, who has attended CMS provider APIs and scheduling session. Was there any coordination with that team on the patient and provider scheduling topic? Not sure if that's on topic for your presentation, but.
So we work a lot with CMS, but I'm not sure what this question is about. So, you know, we actually at MITRE do IG building. We're not only toolsmiths, we also, in fact, we built this tool because we do so much building of IGs, and we've worked with CMS, we've worked with ONC and other government agencies that in the US to build implementation guides for various purposes. And there's a bunch of MITRE folks around this week, Dave Hill, Rob Scanlon, Michael O'Keefe. There are others that have built IGs for, various purposes. I don't think scheduling is one of them, but you can have that discussion offline if you can find anyone from MITRE. So hope that helps.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark, for this presentation. I think we're at the end of time for this session. Please reach out to Mark or join the next session, of course, if you have more questions. Well, thank you. See you later.
Yeah, see you in 15 minutes, I hope.